Thursday, November 23rd, 1961. I didn't see Don Juan sitting on his porch as I drove in. I thought it was strange. I called to him out loud, and his daughter-in-law came out of the house. "He's inside," she said. I found he had dislocated his ankle several weeks before. He'd made his own cast by soaking strips of cloth in a mush made with cactus and powdered bone. The strips, wrapped tightly around his ankle, had dried into a light, streamlined cast. It had the hardness of plaster, but not its bulkiness. "How did it happen?" I asked. His daughter-in-law, a Mexican woman from Yucatan who was tending him, answered me. "It was an accident. He fell and nearly broke his foot." Don Juan laughed and waited until the woman had left the house before answering. "Accident, my eye. I have an enemy nearby, a woman, La Catalina. She pushed me during a moment of weakness and I fell." "Why did she do that?" "She wanted to kill me, that's why." "Was she here with you?" "Yes." "Why did you let her in?" "I didn't. She flew in." "I beg your pardon?" "She's a blackbird, un chanate, and so effective at that. I was caught by surprise. She's been trying to finish me off for a long while. This time she got real close." "Did you say she's a blackbird? I mean, is she a bird?" "There you go again with your questions. She is a blackbird the same way I'm a crow. Am I a man or a bird? I'm a man who knows how to become a bird. But going back to La Catalina, she's a fiendish witch. Her intent to kill me is so strong, I can hardly fight her off. The blackbird came all the way into my house and I couldn't stop it." "Can you become a bird, Don Juan?" "Yes, but that's something we'll take up later." "Why does she want to kill you?" "Oh, there's an old problem between us. It got out of hand, and now it looks as if I'll have to finish her off before she finishes me." "Are you going to use witchcraft?" I asked with great expectations. "Don't be silly. No witchcraft would ever work on her. Other plans. I'll tell you about them someday." "Can your ally protect you from her?" "No. The little smoke only tells me what to do. Then I must protect myself." "How about Mescalito? Can he protect you from her?" "No. Mescalito is a teacher, not a power to be used for personal reasons." "How about the devil's weed?" "I've already said that I must protect myself following the directions of my ally the smoke. And as far as I know, the smoke can do anything. If you want to know about any point in question, the smoke will tell you, and it'll give you not only knowledge, but also the means to proceed. It's the most marvelous ally a man could have." "Is the smoke the best possible ally for everybody?" "It's not the same for everybody. Many fear it and won't touch it, or even get close to it. The smoke is like everything else. It wasn't made for all of us." "What kind of smoke is it, Don Juan?" "The smoke of diviners." Noticeable reverence in his voice, a mood I'd never detected before. "I'll begin by telling you exactly what my benefactor said to me when he began to teach me about it. Although at that time, like yourself now, I couldn't possibly have understood. The devil's weed is for those who bid for power. The smoke is for those who want to watch and see. And in my opinion, the smoke is peerless. Once a man enters into its field, every other power is at his command. It's magnificent. Of course, it takes a lifetime. It takes years alone to become acquainted with its two vital parts, the pipe and the smoke mixture. The pipe was given to me by my benefactor, and after so many years of fondling it, it has become mine. It has grown into my hands. To turn it over to your hands, for instance, will be a real task for me and a great accomplishment for you, if we succeed. The pipe will feel the strain of being handled by someone else, and if one of us makes a mistake, there won't be any way to prevent the pipe from busting open by its own force or escaping from our hands to shatter, even if it falls on a pile of straw. If that ever happens, it would mean the end of us both, particularly of me. The smoke would turn against me in unbelievable ways. How could it turn against you if it's your ally? My questions seemed to have altered his flow of thoughts. He didn't speak for a long time. The difficulty of the ingredients, he proceeded suddenly, makes the smoke mixture one of the most dangerous substances I know. No one can prepare it without being coached. It is deadly poisonous to anyone except the smoke's protege. Pipe and mixture ought to be treated with intimate care, and the man attempting to learn must prepare himself by leading a hard, quiet life. Its effects are so dreadful that only a very strong man can stand the smallest puff. Everything is terrifying and confusing at the outset, but every new puff makes things more precise, and suddenly the world opens up anew. Unimaginable. When this happens, the smoke has become one's ally and will resolve any question by allowing one to enter into inconceivable worlds. This is the smoke's greatest property, its greatest gift, and it performs its function without hurting in the least. I call the smoke a true ally. As usual, we were sitting in front of his house, where the dirt floor is always clean and packed hard. He suddenly got up and went inside the house. After a few moments, he returned with a narrow bundle and sat down again. "This is my pipe," he said. He leaned over toward me and showed me a pipe he drew out of a sheath made of green canvas. It was perhaps 9 or 10 inches long. The stem was made of reddish wood. It was plain, without ornamentation. The bowl also seemed to be made of wood, but it was rather bulky in comparison with the thin stem. It had a sleek finish and was dark gray, almost charcoal. He held the pipe in front of my face. I thought he was handing it over to me. I stretched out my hand to take it, but he quickly drew it back. "This pipe was given to me by my benefactor," he said. "In turn, I will pass it on to you. You must get to know it. Every time you come here, I will give it to you. Begin by touching it. Hold it very briefly at first, until you and the pipe get used to each other. Then, put it in your pocket, or perhaps inside your shirt. And finally, put it to your mouth. All this should be done little by little, in a slow, careful way. When the bond has been established, cuando la amistad está hecha, you will smoke from it. If you follow my advice and don't rush, the smoke may become your preferred ally, too." He handed me the pipe, but without letting go of it. I stretched my right arm toward it. "With both hands," he said. I touched the pipe with both hands for a very brief moment. He didn't extend it to me all the way so that I could grasp it, but only far enough for me to touch it. Then he pulled it back. "The first step is to like the pipe. That takes time." "Can the pipe dislike me?" "No, the pipe cannot dislike you, but you must learn to like it, so that when the time of smoking comes for you, the pipe will help you to be unafraid." "What do you smoke, Don Juan?" "This." He opened his collar and exposed to view a small bag he kept under his shirt, which hung from his neck like a medallion. He brought it out, untied it, and very carefully poured some of its contents into the palm of his hand. As far as I could tell, the mixture looked like finely shredded tea leaves, varying in color from dark brown to light green, with a few specks of bright yellow. He returned the mixture to the bag, closed the bag, tied it with a leather string, and put it under his shirt again. "What kind of mixture is it?" "There are lots of things in it. To get all the ingredients is a very difficult undertaking. One must travel afar. The little mushrooms, los honguitos, needed to prepare the mixture grow only at certain times of the year, and only in certain places." "Do you have a different mixture for each type of aid you need?" "No, there's only one smoke, and there is no other like it." He pointed to the bag hanging against his chest, and lifted the pipe which was resting between his legs. "These two are one. One cannot go without the other. This pipe and the secret of this mixture belonged to my benefactor. They were handed down to him in the same way my benefactor gave them to me. The mixture, although difficult to prepare, is replenishable. Its secret lies in its ingredients and in the way they're treated and mixed. The pipe, on the other hand, is a lifetime affair. It must be looked after with infinite care. It is hardy and strong, but it should never be struck or knocked about. It should be handled with dry hands, never when the hands are sweaty, and should be used only when one is alone. And no one, absolutely no one, should ever see it, unless you mean to give it to somebody. That is what my benefactor taught me, and that is the way I have dealt with the pipe all my life." "What would happen if you should lose or break the pipe?" He shook his head very slowly and looked at me. "I would die." "Are all the sorcerers' pipes like yours?" "Not all of them have pipes like mine, but I know some men who do." "Can you yourself make a pipe like this one, Don Juan?" I insisted. "Suppose you didn't have it, how could you give me one if you wanted to do so?" "If I didn't have the pipe, I could not nor would I want to give one. I would give you something else instead." He seemed to be somehow cross at me. He placed this pipe very carefully inside the sheath, which must have been lined with a soft material, because the pipe, which fitted tightly, slid in very smoothly. He went inside the house to put his pipe away. "Are you angry at me, Don Juan?" I asked when he returned. He seemed surprised at my question. "No, I'm never angry at anybody. No human being can do anything important enough for that. You get angry at people when you feel that their acts are important. I don't feel that way any longer." It began on November 23rd, 1961, when I found him in his house with a dislocated ankle. He explained that he had an enemy, a sorceress who could turn into a blackbird and who had attempted to kill him. "As soon as I can walk, I'm going to show you who the woman is," Don Juan said. "You must know who she is." "Why does she want to kill you?" He shrugged his shoulders impatiently and refused to say anything else. I came back to see him 10 days later and found him perfectly well. He rotated his ankle to demonstrate to me that it was fine and attributed his prompt recovery to the nature of the cast he himself had made. "It's good you're here," he said. "Today I'm going to take you on a little journey." He then directed me to drive to a desolate area. We stopped there. Don Juan stretched his legs and made himself comfortable on the seat, as if he were going to take a nap. He told me to relax and remain very quiet. He said we had to be as inconspicuous as possible until nightfall, because the late afternoon was a very dangerous time for the business we were pursuing. "What kind of business are we pursuing?" I asked. "We're here to stake out La Catalina," he said. When it was fairly dark, we slid out of the car and walked very slowly and noiselessly into the desert chaparral. From the place where we stopped, I could distinguish the black silhouette of the hills on both sides. We were in a flat, fairly wide canyon. Don Juan gave me detailed instructions on how to stay merged with the chaparral and taught me a way to sit in vigil, as he called it. He told me to tuck my right leg under my left thigh and keep my left leg in a squat position. He explained that the tucked leg was used as a spring in order to stand up with great speed if it were necessary. He then told me to sit facing the west, because that was the direction of the woman's house. He sat next to me, to my right, and told me in a whisper to keep my eyes focused on the ground, searching, or rather, waiting for a sort of wind wave that would make a ripple in the bushes. Whenever the ripple touched the bushes on which I'd focused my gaze, I was supposed to look up and see the sorceress in all her magnificent evil splendor. Don Juan actually used those words. When I asked him to explain what he meant, he said that if I detected a ripple, I simply had to look up and see for myself, because a sorcerer in flight was such a unique sight that it defied explanations. There was a fairly steady wind, and I thought I detected a ripple in the bushes many times. I looked up each time, prepared to have a transcendental experience, but I didn't see anything. Every time the wind blew the bushes, Don Juan would kick the ground vigorously, whirling around, moving his arms as if they were whips. The strength of his movements was extraordinary. After a few failures to see the sorceress in flight, I was sure I wasn't going to witness any transcendental event. Yet Don Juan's display of power was so exquisite that I didn't mind spending the night there. At daybreak, Don Juan sat down by me. He seemed to be totally exhausted. He could hardly move. He lay down on his back and mumbled that he had failed to pierce the woman. I was very intrigued by that statement. He repeated it several times, and each time his tone became more downhearted, more desperate. I began to experience an unusual anxiety. I found it very easy to project my feelings into Don Juan's mood. Don Juan didn't mention anything about the incident or the woman for several months. I thought he had either forgotten or resolved the whole affair. One day, however, I found him in a very agitated mood, and in a manner that was completely incongruous with his natural calmness, he told me that the blackbird had stood in front of him the night before, almost touching him, and that he hadn't even awakened. The woman's artfulness was so great that he hadn't felt her presence at all. He said his good fortune was to wake up in the nick of time to stage a horrendous fight for his life. Don Juan's tone of voice was moving, almost pathetic. I felt an overwhelming surge of compassion and concern. In a somber and dramatic tone, he reaffirmed that he had no way to stop her, and that the next time she came near him was going to be his last day on earth. I became despondent and was nearly in tears. Don Juan seemed to notice my profound concern and laughed, I thought, bravely. He patted me on the back and said that I shouldn't worry, that he wasn't altogether lost yet, because he had one last card, a trump card. A warrior lives strategically, he said, smiling. A warrior never carries loads he cannot handle. Don Juan's smile had the power to dispel the ominous clouds of doom. I suddenly felt elated, and we both laughed. He patted my head. You know, of all the things on this earth, you are my last card, he said abruptly, looking straight into my eyes. What? You're my trump card in my fight against that witch. I didn't understand what he meant, and he explained that the woman didn't know me, and that if I played my hand as he would direct me, I had a better-than-good chance to pierce her. What do you mean by pierce her? You cannot kill her, but you must pierce her like a balloon. If you do that, she'll leave me alone. But don't think about it now. I'll tell you what to do when the time comes. Months went by. I had forgotten the incident and was caught by surprise when I arrived at his house one day. Don Juan came out running and didn't let me get out of my car. You must leave immediately, he whispered with appalling urgency. Listen carefully. Buy a shotgun, or get one in any way you can. Don't bring me your own gun. Do you understand? Get any gun except your own and bring it here right away. Why do you want a shotgun? Go now! I returned with a shotgun. I hadn't had enough money to buy one, but a friend of mine had given me his old gun. Don Juan didn't look at it. He explained, laughing, that he had been abrupt with me because the blackbird was on the roof of the house, and he didn't want her to see me. Finding the blackbird on the roof gave me the idea that you could bring a gun and pierce her with it, Don Juan said emphatically. I don't want anything to happen to you, so I suggested that you buy the gun or that you get one in any other way. You see, you have to destroy the gun after completing the task. What kind of task are you talking about? You must attempt to pierce the woman with your shotgun. He made me clean the gun by rubbing it with the fresh leaves and stems of a peculiarly scented plant. He himself rubbed 2 shells and placed them inside the barrel. Then he said I was to hide in front of his house and wait until the blackbird landed on the roof, and then, after taking careful aim,
I was supposed to let go with both barrels. The effect of the surprise, more than the pellets, would pierce the woman. And if I were powerful and determined, I could force her to leave him alone. Thus, my aim had to be impeccable, and so did my determination to pierce her. You must scream at the moment you shoot. It must be a potent and piercing yell. He then piled bundles of bamboo and fire sticks about 10 feet away from the ramada of his house. He made me lean against the piles. The position was quite comfortable. I was sort of half-seated. My back was well propped, and I had a good view of the roof. He said it was too early for the witch to be out, and that we had until dusk to do all the preparation. He would then pretend he was locking himself inside the house in order to attract her and elicit another attack on his person. He told me to relax and find a comfortable position that I could shoot from without moving. He made me aim at the roof a couple of times and concluded that the act of lifting the gun to my shoulder and taking aim was too slow and cumbersome. He then built a prop for the gun. He made 2 deep holes with a pointed iron bar, planted 2 forked sticks in them, and tied a long pole in between the forks. The structure gave me a shooting support and allowed me to keep the gun aimed at the roof. Don Juan looked at the sky and said it was time for him to go into the house. He got up and calmly went inside, giving me the final admonition that my endeavor wasn't a joke and that I had to hit the bird with the first shot. After Don Juan left, I had a few more minutes of twilight, and then it became quite dark. It seemed as if darkness had been waiting until I was alone, and suddenly it descended on me. I tried to focus my eyes on the roof, which was silhouetted against the sky. For a while there was enough light on the horizon so the line of the roof was still visible, but then the sky became black and I could hardly see the house. I kept my eyes focused on the roof for hours without noticing anything at all. I saw a couple of owls flying by toward the north. The span of their wings was quite remarkable, and they couldn't be mistaken for blackbirds. At a given moment, however, I distinctly noticed the black shape of a small bird landing on the roof. It was definitely a bird. My heart began pounding hard. I felt a buzzing in my ears. I aimed in the dark and pulled both triggers. There was quite a loud explosion. I felt a strong recoil of the gun butt on my shoulder, and at the same time I heard a most piercing and horrendous human shriek. It was loud and eerie and seemed to have come from the roof. I had a moment of total confusion. I then remembered that Don Juan had admonished me to yell as I shot, and I'd forgotten to do so. I was thinking of reloading my gun when Don Juan opened the door and came out running. He had his kerosene lantern with him. He appeared to be quite nervous. "I think you got her. We must find the dead bird now." He brought a ladder and made me climb up and look on the ramada, but I couldn't find anything there. He climbed up and looked himself for a while, with equally negative results. "Perhaps you've blasted the bird to bits, in which case we must find at least a feather." We began looking around the ramada first, and then around the house. We looked with the light of the lantern until morning. Then we started looking again all over the area we'd covered during the night. Around 11 a.m., Don Juan called off our search. He sat down dejected, smiled sheepishly at me, and said that I had failed to stop his enemy, and that now, more than ever before, his life wasn't worth a hoot, because the woman was doubtlessly irked, itching to take revenge. "You're safe, though," Don Juan said reassuringly. "The woman doesn't know you." As I was walking to my car to return home, I asked him if I had to destroy the shotgun. He said the gun had done nothing, and I should give it back to its owner. I noticed a profound look of despair in Don Juan's eyes. I felt so moved by it that I was about to weep. "What can I do to help you?" "There's nothing you can do." We remained silent for a moment. I wanted to leave right away. I felt an oppressive anguish. I was ill at ease. "Would you really try to help me?" Don Juan asked, in a childlike tone. I told him again that my total person was at his disposal, that my affection for him was so profound I would undertake any kind of action to help him. Don Juan smiled and asked again if I really meant that, and I vehemently reaffirmed my desire to help him. "If you really mean it, I may have one more chance. He seemed to be delighted. He smiled broadly and clapped his hands several times, the way he always does when he wants to express a feeling of pleasure. This change of mood was so remarkable that it also involved me. I suddenly felt that the oppressive mood, the anguish, had been vanquished, and life was inexplicably exciting again. Don Juan sat down, and I did likewise. He looked at me for a long moment, and then proceeded to tell me in a very calm and deliberate manner that I was in fact the only person who could help him at that moment, and thus he was going to ask me to do something very dangerous and very special. He paused for a moment, as if he wanted a reaffirmation on my part, and I again reiterated my firm desire to do anything for him. I'm going to give you a weapon to pierce her. He took a long object from his pouch and handed it to me. I took it and then examined it. I almost dropped it. It's a wild boar, he went on. You must pierce her with it. The object I was holding was a dry foreleg of a wild boar. The skin was ugly and the bristles were revolting to the touch. The hoof was intact and its two halves were spread out as if the leg were stretched. It was an awful-looking thing. It made me feel almost sick to my stomach. He quickly took it back. You must ram the wild boar right into her navel. What? I said in a feeble voice. You must hold the wild boar in your left hand and stab her with it. She's a sorceress, and the wild boar will enter her belly, and no one in this world except another sorcerer will see it stuck in there. This isn't an ordinary battle, but an affair of sorcerers. The danger you'll run is that if you fail to pierce her, she might strike you dead on the spot, or her companions and relatives will shoot you or knife you. You may, on the other hand, get out without a scratch. If you succeed, she'll have a hellish time with the wild boar in her body, and she'll leave me alone. An oppressive anguish enveloped me again. I had a profound affection for Don Juan. I admired him. At the time of this startling request, I had already learned to regard his way of life and his knowledge as a paramount accomplishment. How could anyone let a man like that die? And yet, how could anyone deliberately risk his life? I became so immersed in my deliberations, I didn't notice that Don Juan had stood up and was standing by me until he patted me on the shoulder. I looked up. He was smiling benevolently. Whenever you feel that you really want to help me, you should return, but not until then. If you come back, I know what we'll have to do. Go now. If you don't want to return, I'll understand that too. I automatically stood up, got into my car, and drove away. Don Juan had actually let me off the hook. I could have left and never returned, but somehow the thought of being free to leave didn't soothe me. I drove a while longer and then impulsively turned around and drove back to Don Juan's house. He was still sitting underneath his ramada and didn't seem surprised to see me. Sit down, he said. The clouds in the west are beautiful. It'll be dark shortly. Sit quietly and let the twilight fill you. Do whatever you want now, but when I tell you, look straight at those shiny clouds and ask the twilight to give you power and calmness. I sat facing the western clouds for a couple of hours. Don Juan went into the house and stayed inside. When it was getting dark, he returned. The twilight has come. Stand up. Don't close your eyes, but look straight at the clouds. Put your arms up with your hands open and your fingers extended and trot in place. I followed his instructions. I lifted my arms over my head and began trotting. Don Juan came to my side and corrected my movements. He placed the leg of the wild boar against the palm of my left hand and made me hold it with my thumb. He then pulled my arms down until they pointed to the orange and dark gray clouds over the horizon, toward the west. He extended my fingers like fans and told me not to curl them over the palms of my hands. It was of crucial importance that I keep my fingers spread, because if I closed them, I wouldn't be asking the twilight for power and calm, but would be menacing it. He also corrected my trotting. He said it should be peaceful and uniform, as if I were actually running toward the twilight with my extended arms. I couldn't fall asleep during that night. It was as if, instead of calming me, the twilight had agitated me into a frenzy. I still have so many things pending in my life, so many things unresolved. Don Juan chuckled softly.
Nothing is pending in the world.
Nothing is finished, yet nothing is unresolved. Go to sleep. Don Juan's words were strangely soothing. Around 10 o'clock the next morning, Don Juan gave me something to eat, and then we were on our way. He whispered that we were going to approach the woman around noon, or before noon, if possible. He said that the ideal time would have been the early hours of the day, because a witch is always less powerful or less aware in the morning, but she would never leave the protection of her house at those hours. I didn't ask any questions. He directed me to the highway, and at a certain point, he told me to stop and park on the side of the road. He said we had to wait there. I looked at my watch. It was 5 minutes to 11. I yawned repeatedly. I was actually sleepy. My mind wandered around aimlessly. Suddenly, Don Juan straightened up and nudged me. I jumped up in my seat. There she is! I saw a woman walking toward the highway on the edge of a cultivated field. She was carrying a basket looped in her right arm. It wasn't until then that I noticed we were parked near a crossroads. There were 2 narrow trails which ran parallel to both sides of the highway, and another wider and more trafficked trail that ran perpendicular to the highway. Obviously, people who used that trail had to walk across the paved road. When the woman was still on the dirt road, Don Juan told me to get out of the car. Do it now, he said firmly. I obeyed him. The woman was almost on the highway. I ran and overtook her. I was so close to her that I felt her clothes on my face. I took the wild boar hoof from under my shirt and thrust it at her. I didn't feel any resistance to the blunt object I had in my hand. I saw a fleeting shadow in front of me, like a drape. My head turned to my right, and I saw the woman standing 50 feet away on the opposite side of the road. She was a fairly young, dark woman with a strong, stocky body. She was smiling at me. Her teeth were white and big, and her smile was placid. She had closed her eyes halfway, as if to protect them from the wind. She was still holding her basket, looped over her right arm. I then had a moment of unique confusion. I turned around to look at Don Juan. He was making frantic gestures to call me back. I ran back. There were 3 or 4 men coming in a hurry toward me. I got into the car and sped away in the opposite direction. I tried to ask Don Juan what had happened, but I couldn't talk. My ears were bursting with an overwhelming pressure. I felt that I was choking. He seemed to be pleased and began to laugh. It was as if my failure didn't concern him. I had my hands so tight around the steering wheel that I couldn't move them. They were frozen. My arms were rigid, and so were my legs. In fact, I couldn't take my foot off the gas pedal. Don Juan patted me on the back and told me to relax. Little by little, the pressure in my ears diminished. "What happened back there?" I finally asked. He giggled like a child without answering. Then he asked me if I had noticed the way the woman got out of the way. He praised her excellent speed. Don Juan's talk seemed so incongruous that I couldn't really follow him. He praised the woman. He said her power was impeccable, and she was a relentless enemy. I asked Don Juan if he didn't mind my failure. I was truly surprised and annoyed at his change of mood. He seemed to be actually glad. He told me to stop. I parked alongside the road. He put his hand on my shoulder and looked piercingly into my eyes. "Whatever I've done to you today was a trick," he said bluntly. "The rule is that a man of knowledge has to trap his apprentice. Today, I have trapped you, and I've tricked you into learning." I was dumbfounded. I couldn't arrange my thoughts. Don Juan explained that the whole involvement with the woman was a trap, that she had never been a threat to him, and that his job was to put me in touch with her under specific conditions of abandon and power I had experienced when I tried to pierce her. He commended my resolution and called it an act of power which demonstrated to the woman that I was capable of great exertion. Don Juan said that even though I wasn't aware of it, all I did was to show off in front of her. You could never touch her, but you showed your claws to her. She knows now that you're not afraid. You've challenged her. I used her to trick you because she's powerful and relentless and never forgets. Men are usually too busy to be relentless enemies. I felt a terrible anger. I told him that one shouldn't play with a person's innermost feelings and loyalties. Don Juan laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks, and I hated him. I had an overwhelming desire to punch him and leave. There was, however, such a strange rhythm in his laughter that it kept me almost paralyzed. "Don't be so angry," Don Juan said soothingly. Then he said that his acts had never been a farce, that he'd also thrown his life away a long time before when his own benefactor tricked him, just as he had tricked me. Don Juan said that his benefactor was a cruel man who didn't think about him the way he, Don Juan, thought about me. He added very sternly that the woman had tested her strength against him and had really tried to kill him. "Now she knows that I was playing with her," he said, laughing, "and she'll hate you for it. She can't do anything to me, but she'll take it out on you. She doesn't know yet how much power you have, so she'll come to test you, little by little. Now you have no choice but to learn in order to defend yourself, or you will fall prey to that lady. She is no trick." Don Juan reminded me of the way she'd flown away. "Don't be angry. It wasn't an ordinary trick. It was the rule." There was something about the way the woman moved away from me that was truly maddening. I had witnessed it myself. She had jumped the width of the highway in a flick of an eyelash. I had no way to get out of that certainty. From that moment on, I focused all my attention on that incident, and little by little, I accumulated proof that she was actually following me.